At the edge of a forgotten village in a house wrapped in ivy and thyme, lived a man who hadn't spoken in over 30 years. The children called him the keeper of stillness, and the elders crossed the street when they saw him. They said that one winter long ago he locked all his words in a copper box, buried it beneath a lemon tree, and never uttered another syllable. But no one really knew why. He simply tended his garden with soil-covered hands and eyes turned upward, as if listening to something no one else could hear. The story begins with her, a woman of 39 autumns, weary of interpreting the world through borrowed voices. She felt there was something in the old man's silence that she lacked. Why do some people feel whole without saying a word, while others, surrounded by noise, remain in pieces? What is it that silence teaches that no book, therapy, or spoken prayer can offer? One morning after a dream without images, she stepped barefoot onto the cold earth and decided to visit him. She would bring a box of tea and a woven blanket, not as gifts, but as excuses. The soul often cloaks its sacred questions in ordinary gestures. As she walked the uneven stone path to his home, the world seemed to quiet itself, as if time were holding its breath to witness what might unfold. The door was open, but he said nothing, just motioned with his hands for her to sit on a wooden bench beneath the lemon tree. 2 cups already waited there, and the kettle was whispering softly in the kitchen. That place didn't seem to demand answers, only presence. And that unsettled her more than any harsh word ever spoken against her. She tried to speak, but her voice betrayed her. The silence between them was thick like velvet, and she didn't know how to cross it. So she looked at his hands, marked by soil, by lines, by time, and felt that perhaps the answer she sought had never been something to find, but something to remember. The tea was ready, but neither of them moved to pour it. The steam rose slowly from the cups, swirling like an ancient spirit looking for shelter. Time, in that place, did not behave as elsewhere. It expanded, thickened, breathed on its own. A silent bird perched on the highest branch, and even the wind stepped gently through the leaves. It felt like everything was waiting for her to understand something before continuing. The old man remained still, his gaze resting on the ground. Yet there was tenderness in that stillness, a kind of old love that didn't offer itself, but was fully there, like a stone warmed by decades of sun. She felt a discomfort she couldn't name. It didn't come from him, but from within, from the part of her that had always filled silence with stories, fears, or justifications. Here, there was no space for any of that. Only the raw presence of what she had never learned to hear. The first tear slipped down her cheek uninvited. It wasn't from sorrow or grief. It felt more like the soul exhaling, as if something inside her, long locked away, had finally been granted permission to dissolve. She didn't try to hide it. The old man didn't react. It was as if the weeping had been expected, like a silent ritual, an ancient gesture from those who begin to listen with their entire being. Then he stood. Without a word, he went to a small wooden shelf and retrieved something wrapped in cloth. He placed it before her with slow, earthen hands. A box, old, worn, dark wood with brass hinges. He didn't say what was inside. He merely touched the lid with fingers stained by soil, as if opening a door between worlds. And for the first time, she felt that silence had a voice. She didn't open the box. She didn't need to. It was a mirror, not made of glass, but memory. And in it, she saw herself, a child, running through a soundless field, alone, yet complete, as if time had never been broken, as if silence, back in that distant childhood, had still been a friend. The childhood field appeared again, not as a place, but as a sensation. That forgotten breeze brushed her face like a memory still breathing. It was there she had once spoken with the sky, listened to the ants, interpreted the moods of trees. But someone had told her long ago that such things were not enough, that she needed to speak clearly, think fast, make sense. And slowly she forgot the language of quiet things. The box before her remained closed, but inside there were echoes, not sounds for ears, but pulses, fragments, non-linear threads of time. And she began to understand. Silence was not absence. It was the oldest form of presence. And perhaps that's why it frightened so many. Because only what is whole can remain silent. Everything else screams. The old man asked no questions. He offered no explanations. He simply returned to his seat and looked at her in a way that peeled through her many layers. That unsettled her again. She was used to being seen through surfaces, pretty or tired, strong or broken. But here, there were no adjectives, only essence. And that felt more exposed than any kind of nakedness. She leaned toward the box, not to open it, but to feel its weight. It was light, lighter than she expected. And she knew wordlessly that the burden had never been in the box. It had always been in her fear of facing it. Touching it felt like touching her own soul for the first time in years. Something shifted inside, an old gear beginning to turn again. Outside, the sun moved gently across the yard. The lemon tree leaves gleamed like golden mirrors. And in that fleeting moment, she realized she didn't need to say anything anymore. Because something was speaking for her. Something ancient. Something whole. The next day she returned. This time she brought no tea, no words, only her hands, which now felt lighter. The old man was already waiting, seated on the same bench with the same stillness. But something in her had shifted, a thread of surrender, like someone no longer resisting what they don't understand. She sat gently, and together they listened to what could not be heard. For hours nothing happened, yet inside her everything moved. Time, in its ancient patience, began to reveal the stitching of her life, the choices made out of fear, the words spoken only to avoid silence, the moments she was present in body but absent in soul, and also the forgotten glimpses of truth, like when she once held her grandfather's hand in quiet, and everything was said without a sound. She began to realize that silence didn't live only between words, but in the pauses of life, between seasons, between the arrival of one love and the fading of another, between the last tear and the smile that hasn't yet bloomed. Perhaps it was in those spaces that the wisdom of time dwelled. Then, the old man rose once more. He walked into the garden and began to dig, slowly, as if dancing with the soil. She followed without knowing why. When the hole was ready, he pulled a small copper box from a hidden corner. Rusted, cracked, but still whole. He placed it in the earth and covered it carefully, like one buries a secret that has completed its purpose. She understood, without explanations, that something was ending and something else was beginning. The box was an offering, to time, to silence, to all that is never spoken, yet shapes everything. And for the first time, she felt part of something larger than her longings. The next morning, she woke before the sun, not out of urgency, but because something inside her was already rising. The silence that once unnerved her now felt like an ancient melody, one that only reveals itself when the world goes quiet. She dressed slowly as if preparing for a sacred rite. She walked to the old man's home and found the gate slightly open, as though he had known she would come. This time, she brought the cups. She poured the tea in silence, mirroring his gesture from the day before, and the old man smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile filled with morning light. Something had changed. She was no longer trying to decipher his silence. They were now sharing a space where words were unnecessary. Time had become an ally, not an opponent. And that was enough. For hours they sat at the edge of the garden, watching bees dance among the lemons, the wind folding into the fabric of the drying clothes, cats leaping across walls like travelers between worlds. She began to hear what had always been there, the sound of her own blood, the breath of the stones, the steady pulse of the earth. Everything was speaking, not with voice, but with truth. Unexpectedly, the old man stood and brought out an old mirror, iron-framed, rusted, its glass clouded by time. He placed it before her and stepped back. She looked, and what she saw was not just her face. She saw the silenced versions of herself, the ones who screamed inwardly, the ones who waited, the ones who dreamed without knowing how to ask. And she understood. The old man had never been a teacher. He was a mirror too, a reflection of what she had needed to remember. The silence he lived in was the same one she had lost. He had never been instructing her, only reminding. In the days that followed, she returned again and again. She no longer brought anything in her hands. Sometimes they sat, sometimes they wandered through the garden. There was no need for exchange, no hunger for revelation. Their time together had become a kind of prayer, not spoken, but breathed. The old man showed her the compost, the linen-wrapped seeds, the small gestures that upheld the invisible. She began to feel the seasons moving within her. There were winters still reluctant to thaw, springs she had once aborted out of fear of blooming too much. But now, with time stretched between her fingers, she no longer rushed the unfolding. She had learned from the old man, fruit ripens only when it stops fearing its own sweetness. It was on one of these quiet afternoons that she noticed he was beginning to vanish. First through his gaze, which wandered further each time. Then through brief absences, walks that stretched longer than usual. And one day she arrived to find the bench empty. The lemon tree swayed gently, as if cradling a living absence. There was no note, no farewell, only space. She did not cry. She did not search. She sat on the same bench and listened, and she understood. The old man had never been a destination, but a portal, a messenger of stillness. He had left the moment she no longer needed him to listen. That's how true presences depart, without noise, without endings. That night, for the first time in years, she slept in peace, asleep without armor. She dreamt of the child in the field running again, but this time she caught up. They sat together in the soil and listened to the roots, in silence. Seasons turned softly through her. Time no longer rushed. The house where the old man once lived was now cloaked in birdsong and vines. No one knew where he had gone, but she did. He had become part of time itself, woven into wind and stone. She turned the garden into a place of listening. Lavender and rosemary grew among stones engraved not with words but with pauses. People began to come, not seeking answers, but stillness. She welcomed them as she had been welcomed, with a cup of tea, a shaded bench, and undivided presence. Nothing more. Boxes once feared now rested everywhere, some open, some still sealed. They were not meant to be understood but honored, symbols of what each soul carries and what may never need to be spoken. And always at the end of each visit, she offered a small mirror to those who came, not as guidance but as reminder. Some things are only seen when you're no longer searching. One late afternoon, as she watered the lemon tree, she felt a warm breeze brush the back of her neck. She turned. No one. But the scent of wet soil, the murmur of leaves, the flicker of birds, all of it whispered his name. And she knew. The old man was now wind, was earth, was time. And in that moment, for the first time in her entire life, she understood. Silence had never wanted to explain anything. It had only been waiting for her to come home. When the world becomes too loud, return here. There's a bench waiting for you in the garden of what doesn't need to be said. Bring your silence, your sealed box, your tired listening, and let time care for what you haven't named yet.